Alright, hello everybody, welcome to our next lesson here. One of the last lessons we're going to kind of wrap up here in terms of quarter one, but we're looking at moving westward today. So our objectives and standards are to explain the reasons why many African Americans moved westward in the late 1800s, and to identify achievements and struggles by African Americans in the West. Take a moment there to look over the standards, please. And our desired result. How did the West change the lives of African Americans? So, leaving for the West, many African Americans grew tired of their treatment and segregation, especially in the South, and in 1879, more than 15,000 Southern African Americans left for Kansas. Now, they're going to be led by that gentleman there, a former slave, Benjamin Pap Singleton, along with the Exodus of 1879, and people who partook in the Exodus were known as Exodusters or Exodusters. And he believed that African Americans would gain equality in the South, just not in his lifetime. So he was determined to enjoy, his days in peace. So African American communities in the West, in Kansas, African Americans established their own communities, and Benjamin Pap Singleton was responsible for two communities before the Exodus. The first Singleton colony he established failed, but the second one was more successful. Now, many people who moved to these singleton communities had very little money, but the arrival of more exodusters or exoders allowed for more communities. In the 1870s and 1880s, 20 African American towns were founded, and one of the most successful towns that later had a lot of struggles was Nicodemus, Kansas. So cowboys and cattle. It is estimated by historians that about 25% of cowboys were African American. Now, they typically lived undocumented, solitary, or kind of alone lives, and they have remained nameless. However, there's information about a few that has survived. One of these was Nat Love, and his picture's there. So during the 1880s, Nat Love was one of the best known cowboys. He was born a slave in 1854 in Tennessee and traveled west in 1869. And Nat Love taught himself to ride wild horses, and he shot with deadly accuracy. And he did earn a reputation in the West as a champion rider. Other influential African Americans in the West, the inventor, of the modern rodeo sport of steer wrestling was Bill Pickett. You see his picture here. He was born in southern Texas around 1870 and was famous for subduing bulls by biting into the animal's tender upper lip. I don't know about you, I'm not that brave enough to try that, but pretty tough guy, I guess. Um, Famous African American women in the West included Mary Fields, her picture's up top here, who ran a stagecoach line through Montana Territory, and also artist Lenora Russell. So, fighting in the West. In the West, there were four regiments of African American troops known as Buffalo Soldiers. You can see one of their pictures here. So, in 1866, there's a law that will allow for the formation of African American troops in peacetime, but they had to be led by white men. Now, Buffalo Soldiers served mostly in the West in places such as Kansas, Montana, and Utah. Some of their roles included escorting stagecoaches, hunting down cattle rustlers, people trying to steal people's cattle, and protecting settlers from Native Americans. Now, African American soldiers were actually given the name Buffalo Soldiers by Native Americans, and they were also very widely respected as well. From 1870 to 1890, 19 of them received medals of honor, and there were very few that were ever ill behaved, such as being drunk or anything like that. Very few of them deserted or left the army, and very few of them committed any crimes as well. So struggles with Spain. In 1898, the Spanish-American War began after a battleship, the USS Maine, sunk in Havana Harbor in Cuba. This picture here kind of shows you a depiction of what we could have assumed should have happened. Now, among the 260 men that were killed were 22 African American sailors. Now, many people blamed Spain for the sinking of the ship because Spain had control of Cuba. America was trying to get Cuba free from Spain. Trying to give you a brief story of what kind of happened here, and many blamed Spain for sinking the ship, sinking the American ship, and Congress quickly declared war. Now, it was later discovered that Spain probably didn't sink the ship, but either way, the United States will declare war on Spain, even though it was later discovered that they believe something mechanical happened that caused the ship to sink. Among the early regiments to arrive in Cuba were the Buffalo Soldiers, who we just talked about. Now, the war lasted just over 12 weeks, but even despite it was kind of a short little war, they called it the Splendid Little War, actually, as a nickname since it was so short. But 5 African Americans received medals of honor. Now, while prejudice and discrimination are still going on at home and still remain against African Americans, many whites begin to appreciate the service and the sacrifice of African Americans during the Spanish American War and after, and we'll begin to see how that plays out as we go into the next century here. Okay, so our closure. How did the West change the lives of African Americans? Think about why they moved west, what they were doing out west. Think about some of the influential people, such as the Cowboys and others, and think about the impact of the Buffalo Soldiers and even soldiers in the Spanish American War as well. All right, I hope you have a great rest of your day or night. Try your best in the questions that follow, and hope to talk to you soon.